Welcome, everybody. This is the SIG Architecture Conformance Office Hours meeting for either Wednesday or Tuesday, 16th of June. Most of the places you are 17th of June in New Zealand. I am Hippie Hacker, your host, and there is a Google Doc that I will share, or if someone could share in the link, that would be great. I'm going to share our screen. There's also an attendees area that would be great. If someone wants to, do you want to add yourself there? If you're having trouble adding yourself to the document, I think read-write access is for people part of Kubernetes users. One of the first things I wanted to add to we have a lot of accomplishments that happen here on the throughout the week, and one of the fun ones I'm going to add is add a shout outs area. Also, if we have anybody new on the call that wants to introduce themselves and say hi, I'll probably take a moment to do that as well. All right, I have a shout out for Liggett. He's been bringing anytime that he promotes new things to GA, he always brings his conformance tests with him, and I super appreciate that. And we got 15 new conformance stable endpoints added that came along with the tests. And so we had one untested endpoint in 118, and now there are 15 total tested endpoints that are conformance endpoints. And that's all thanks to Liggett for that. For the rest of our time, we'll probably do a bit of open discussion. The topics today are new watch tooling, some endpoints with low priority, and then we would normally walk the board, but we've kind of condensed it down to some points of interest today. Our first conversation is around our new watch tooling, and Caleb behind me over here, Bobby McBobs, has been doing most of the hard yards on that, and I've been assisting. But we have a current PR open, and we've captured most of that stuff from a previous comment that I can bring up from a while back, and here's the current issue. The summary is what we were looking for was a watch that had, I'll go over to the actual PR, move the recording screen over. This was the, yeah, I think I'm sharing. You can see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes. This is back in the 13th of May, and it's been ongoing before that, but this is, each meeting we try to capture our action items and the consensus at that time. And this is what we had set up back in May, and we wanted to make sure that if things have changed, then it's really clear what those are, so we can get a clear definition of done. On that, from this point, we had some conversations from John, I think, and then we went ahead and started work on the tooling. And I think that is the same. Let's see what this was. Is this the current one? This is the current one. So it's been quite a long conversation through here, and it depends on a lot of points depend on this one going through. So I just want to make sure that we've addressed all concerns, and that anything we haven't addressed, we come to a consensus on as far as the way forward.
Is there anybody else besides me who wants to comment on this? Okay, so, hi, I don't like being the bad guy. I feel, I'm annoyed at the situation, not at any individual in particular. I'm also annoyed with myself. So my annoyance comes from the fact that I feel like there's a lot of complexity being introduced with this PR and the resulting tests that use it. Now, it very well could be that I'm part of the reason this complexity has been introduced. Part of my problem is I have had less and less time to engage with this project over the past couple of weeks, months, whatever you want to call it. And so I'm concerned that between feedback from John and Clayton and myself happening at 2-week intervals, y'all are not getting the appropriate, consistent guidance that you need. And so if this is me doing yet another like redirection, I'm happy to like just stop. But okay, so let me try and restate my concern here. My concern here is the test that is using this is now like, I was using the replication controller test as an example. I think something that's about update and improve the replication controller test. Like, I have lost track of why we decided this tooling was needed for that test, like how it would improve the flakiness of the test. And the test itself is now a couple hundred lines long, which, again, maybe I just chalk that up to the verbosity of Go. But it feels like we're trending in the direction of making these tests longer and introducing more complexity for reasons that I can't quite grasp or understand. The problem is, like, every time I try and review this PR, like, I do try and budget time for y'all, but every time I try and budget time to review this, I find myself having to reconstruct the history of how and why we got to now. So, like, why are we watching events in the first place? And then why use watches instead of polling for things? And then why did we decide to like make this generic watch event tooling? And why did we decide to implement it this specific way and stuff? And by the time I've gotten like halfway through trying to reconstruct that, I'm out of time to review PRs. And so I know like I am but one individual, and I have kind of like dragged my feet or been unable to provide you sufficient review bandwidth. I'm concerned that there's nobody else who seems to be providing you the review bandwidth that you need. And so that's part of my frustration. So I kind of want to like, I think I'm just rambling and I'm not sure if I'm being very clear for y'all, but I want to make sure I unblock you and I allow you to move forward. But so if I say, okay, fine, I guess, I kind of don't really understand this code anymore and I don't understand why we have it anymore, but I'll rubber stamp it to allow you to merge and iterate. What's going to grow out of this? Like, as we start writing a bunch of new tests and copy pasting a bunch of stuff around, are we going to continue to use this pattern, which is really difficult for at least me to comprehend what and why we're doing? And then that leads me to feel concerned that like there are going to be more tests that are difficult to understand. But hey, again, like if I'm the only person here who seems to be dragging his feet and you are all very clearly aligned on like what and why we should be doing this, maybe I should stop, stop dragging my feet or stop letting perfect be the enemy of good. I just like, this feels like a lot of code and I'm back to trying to question like, what? Oh, here's another rambling thing I was gonna say. So the part where this code like retries, so it takes like a function that's the scenario that's going to be run with this watch. And then if at any point things don't work, it's going to retry the entire test all over again. Or it's going to retry that scenario all over again. And near as I can tell, I think you got that guidance from Clayton, where he looked at the issue where he proposed how to do this, and he's like, that's cool, but what if there are long pauses or delays? What if we retry this? And so now we're retrying everything. But this also kind of simulates the behavior of Ginkgo.flake attempts. So I don't know if y'all remember or are familiar with the fact that Ginkgo is the testing framework that we use for this. And way back in the day, Kubernetes added a flag to Ginkgo upstream called flake attempts. And what it would do is if a Ginkgo test case failed, it would just retry the test again. And if it succeeded that second time on that second flake attempt, then it would consider the test passed. It's weird because we would end up with JUnit XML that should both failed and passed for the same test. So we ultimately decided to stop using that feature around December of 2019 because we thought that was masking real flakes. And it did force us to uncover a number of flakes that we had to fix in upstream dependencies, such as run city. And so I feel like this practice of like retrying the entire scenario looks a lot like that behavior that we agreed to stop doing. And now I think I've been talking for 5 minutes straight, so I'm just going to shut up for a bit. I want this to be a dialogue and a conversation.
Do you want to talk?
Yeah, hey Aaron. So the first point that you were making was would you please mind reiterating?
That's fine.
Just to be clear, I think it's really good that you're saying all this. I don't think that you should have any stress or any you shouldn't feel guilty for taking up all that time. But with that said, would you mind saying your first point again? Because there was something that I wanted to comment on with that.
I think like my primary red flag here is I feel like we're introducing a lot of complexity, and I want to understand why this complexity is necessary.
Right. Keep going. Just finding the code really quick.
Sure, it's fine. Like maybe this code by itself isn't that complex. Maybe it's just been a while since I've had to read a ton of code, but like this code by itself maybe isn't a ton of code. I think I found myself scratching my head trying to comprehend the logic of the actual check of events in watch sequence event verifier. But then when I looked at how this was used in the replication controller lifecycle test, I just kind of didn't understand. Why? I don't know.
So I remembered the thing that I was going to say before. I guess one important pattern that I would really like to see in tests is the whole thing of validating that the thing that we just did actually did take place from a separate thing, which allows us to, in the case of patching, which I've had quite a bit of issue with in previous tests, where you patch something and then you need to update it or something. And then there's the waiting to make sure that that actually happens without using a sleep in a real-time situation. So that means in practice, we patch something in some situation, and then we get that object back, and then with that data, we maybe modify it, and then we push it back as an update instead of a patch, which without validating that may cause resource version error or something, and then it can't do the thing that you're wanting to do in the test. So that's the kind of thing that has been a developing pattern through the tests that I've written and the stuff that II has done. So I kind of think it's a good practice to be able to do that, and that's kind of what these two functions in the watch tooling actually ensure, especially the watch until without retry. That's the one which actually is handling the that pattern that I've just said about, but when they use both together, it seems to live out that idea of how tests should be put together, I would say. Yeah.
I wonder if go ahead.
Sorry, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I'm stuck sitting like, sorry, I just keep going back to like, I should read this and try to comprehend it, but that's the blocker for y'all. My concern is just that like, if I'm not taking the time to read this and comprehend it and say LGTM, who is?
Aaron, is this a documentation thing? Because I'm happy to add more documentation on it, because I would like to over document it to make sure it's like completely understood. Is that a thing that I should spend more time on?
I'm not understanding this clearly either, but if this is a new way we are writing E2Es, then we need a much more broader acceptance, and we should probably bring this up. I don't know. I mean, that's my thought.
I wanna throw something similar. So let's assume that everything in the test directory of Kubernetes was like core Kubernetes. You know, if we are implementing something in the E2E framework, let's assume that we were actually doing in the kubelet. I feel like this is a I'm coming to this a little bit late to the party because I only spent a couple hours looking at the issues and the PRs, but I feel like this kind of change. We should have something like a cap, not so much on the whole process, but like actually documenting like we are proposing this kind of structure, this kind of change to E2E test, and this is the behavior that we want. This is the behavior that we want, and this is why we want it, and actually document it somewhere like in SIG testing community as a pattern for people to use. What does everyone think?
I hear what you're saying, George, and I appreciate that that commentary. On the other hand, there's a part of me that feels like we're still kind of trying to figure out what the new best way is. And I feel like putting something like this through a cap is too much process. Like I guess my hope is, and maybe this is me just talking to myself through, I should just merge and iterate even though I don't understand this entirely. This seems like it's adding a lot more code. I would hope this drives us to a place where we can start to reduce the lines of code necessary to write an end-to-end test so that we can understand it. And like the only way you're going to figure out what the fastest, most concise way to write tests is if you get feedback. And without this PR actually getting merged and without you seeing all of this stuff run in CI, you're not really getting any feedback of whether or not this is working effectively at scale, right? You might be getting some cultural feedback from me as a PR reviewer that like, hey, I find this code kind of difficult to understand. And maybe it is a documentation issue. I kind of am having a difficult time deciding that right now. But like, there's a part of me that's just sort of inherently like, because this looks like it's more complex code, I don't trust that it's going to be any less flaky or robust than I run this in CI. And maybe I should just like actually let this merge and we can put that to the test. I don't think this is necessarily mandating a way that everybody writes tests going forward. I view this more as the folks who are working with and alongside Hippie are trying to figure out what is their best practice for writing tests. And I have concerns that like I'm getting in the way of you figuring out your best way to write tests. Okay, so I wanted to go back to the first thing Caleb said. Caleb, you said this was, so the original reason we started using watches in the first place was so that we could affect change on a resource. And then instead of polling the Kubernetes cluster, we instead set up a watch and waited for the watch to send us the updated resource. Is that correct?
It's kind of a partial case. So sometimes for that, yes. But part of what I was also meaning was that we can make sure that that change that we've made has actually come through in a way that doesn't, what do I say? We're we've got something that's happening in the background and we just pull from it to make sure whenever we need to make sure that the resource that we're depending on to be in a particular state appears in that state. Does that make sense? Yeah, something like that. So we have a resource and we patch it and then we make sure that it's updated, and then we know that we're good to move on with whatever we're trying to do with that resource.
Right.
As well as what you said.
Okay. And that's the purpose of watch until without retry. I guess I'm trying to break apart. You added there are two functions. One is watch event sequence verifier, which is the thing that's kind of really tripping me up. And then watch until without retry.
Aaron, I can add a little clarification on the sequencing that I haven't heard mentioned yet on the sequence retry. There was some worries about events happening in the middle that needed to be, I think the word was squashed, or
yeah, similar word.
Where there's other events happening in the middle that aren't important. You're just looking for the duration of the test when it actually completed, ensuring that all of those events occurred. And there was not an easy, can you point that out maybe?
This is pod status, replication.
Replication
control. Sorry. Yeah, so we, for instance, what Chris is saying, we declare the events that we're going to expect, and only the types are required because we already know that the type is going to be unstructured replication control. So we're going through and making sure that there's the added for it and the modified. In fact, for this one, 4 times, and then deleted. So, and then if there's anything in between for whatever reason, then that's okay. We're just going to ignore it. So, yeah, squashed, I guess.
The actual use. Go ahead.
No, go for it. I mean, I think this is where Liggett made a similar comment where I felt like technically this isn't matching events, it's only matching event types, which was making me think that there were a couple of variables and functions that needed to be renamed. But
yeah, that's this part. This is easily extensible. So if there's any extra parts that we need to add in, then we can just make that more than just type. I don't know, but for now that seems to do the job. And yeah, again, it's extensible. So if we want to add any more checks in there, then that should be reasonable.
One thing I heard mentioned was that this is, because it's longer, it's more difficult to read. And I wonder if there's not the way that we've used the tooling is that part of it, or is it the tooling itself, or is it this particular test, like this is the add tooling itself, correct?
Replication control and some of the last step.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where the hardest part is. Is it in the where you've mentioned that the replication control tool is pretty hairy, and the tooling itself is fairly simple comparatively.
I guess so. I mean,
we can leave that particular test open if we want to look at the other, because we've got, I think, 20 points that are ready for approved, or ready for LGTM and whatnot that are using this. This is just one example we pulled out. I think because it maybe had more points or something, but.
I hear you. Just, I guess I don't have a problem with watch until without retry. If I look at it as it's just an alternative to like wait.pull immediate, I think. Does make, I thought there was something that's slightly, yeah, like I can't remember why we need to fork our own copy of the code, but I'll trust that there's a good reason for it. Sorry, I really wish I could use my words better. I mean, one thought would be that a common thing we seem to be waiting for is just for an event of a certain type to come through. So you could probably condense all of that into a one-line utility function that's just waiting for that event. Yeah, I don't know. I guess there's a part of me that's like, apparently I'm the only person who's bothering to review this code. So like, I'm happy to just like let it go through and see what happens. And if it turns out these are very reliable, non-flaky tests, that's cool. And maybe we could work on iterating to like reduce the line count of these a little bit. As we start to see common patterns, can we express those patterns more concisely? The whole watch sequence event, like the watch sequence event thing kind of weirds me out for the replication controller test. For example, I'm specifying I'm specifying that list of events up top, but like it's not immediately clear why or what those events are for. I think Caleb just explained to me that each of those events corresponds to a different like patch call or a modification call or something. And so it seems like it would be clearer if like those were put into the array along the way so that it was obvious to me like which operation was going to produce which expected event, maybe. This whole like defining it all up top thing feels odd, but then I understand why you have to do that the way it's all structured. You can't like, that is a parameter to the function. It's a watch sequence event verifier function. You can't necessarily populate that inside of the scenario function that you're passing in, right? Or am I getting that wrong?
I think I just found it easier to pass it in this way. And then you just declare, you could declare the same way that you declared, like I've declared the actual scenario as a function here. You could declare it right in here, but the reason it was up top was just to make it a bit easier to spot out from the rest of it. Yeah, I think if it's its own parameter, then that makes it easier to find and to use in it than passing it directly into the scenario, where the scenario doesn't use those, but the watch sequence verifier does.
I think we're bumping up some of the limitations around the framework itself when we're trying to run scenario level things. And are these things where, well, we want to have those in the post scenario wrap up, and because the part of us in this is trying to verify that each of these things happened, and it is a bit meta.
Right. Okay, maybe we just spend the entire time walking through this replication controller here. Like, why? Okay, so I understand we like do something that affects change on the replication controller, and then we want to watch to see something happen before we take our next step. That part I guess I understand, but then why do we need to verify the sequence of actual watch events that come through?
Um, the sequence of events as like API calls, the CRUD that you'll do in a test, that's part of the test itself, which we're trying to make sure actually happens. So the events will always come through in terms of order, as in you create an event, or you create something and then you modify something. So just making sure that those things happen in the test that you've written as well.
I'm sorry, I'm just not sure I follow. I think it's not working terribly well.
We were having some issues around making sure that we see and don't perform a modification. And I think it was delete. This was part of the conversation earlier.
Yeah, I remember delete was one of the things.
Are you sure that the delete happened? And then well, what about a sequence of events when happen? Making sure that the sequence of events occur. And then in order to make sure that all of those things happened in the sequence that they were expected, and if not, retrying the scenario. And that was the stuff from mid-May. And so that when we're going through trying to implement that, this is the flow we came up with of, well, let's make sure that for the sequence of things that are required, that we want to see the events, the watch events, having them where the wrapper around the scenario, and that's where we're trying to, if you want to stick it, some options for trying to stick it inside seem a bit difficult given the way that scenarios work within the Ginkgo framework. And that's where I would love some other options, but I don't see any super clear ones that present themselves. And if we do find them, it might be useful. We can modify the function call, because it's definitely a framework level thing if we want to get too much deeper around doing things on a whole scenario level. And this was a simple wrapper to let us look at that sequence and ensure that things arrived in order, regardless of restart, regardless of what was it? The other one that came up often, even though I don't know that it comes often as far as flakiness, would be the watch expiring or the watch disappearing.
That's handled by an existing function.
And we depend on that function already, I think.
That's retry watcher,
And
which was recommended. I can't remember by who, but that's implemented right there.
It was Clayton.
Mm-hmm.
Clayton recommended that
one. I don't know. I guess that all makes sense. Maybe, like I said, maybe my brain's just not working terribly well. So we're checking. I think I'm just sort of trying to like mentally map this to the way I remember tests used to be written. And maybe I'm wrong with this. So I keep mapping like watch until without retry as, oh, that's instead of a wait dot poll immediate, where we pull the system for our expected state, we're going to sit there and watch for our expected state. And the reason we do that is because we think it will be faster. Because we're using a watch, we are then vulnerable to that watch getting closed on us, or we are vulnerable to unreliable event. No, sorry, watch events are separate with the events. So we believe that watch events are reliable. So instead of creating our own watch for each of these things. We reuse a watch, and that watch is automatically created for us. Okay. So then, the reason we verify that all of the events arrived in the expected order, I guess I'm having a much more difficult time still comprehending why we do that. It seems like at each step of the way, we're waiting until we see the event we expect to see. And so at the very end, watch until without retry, like it's gonna wait until it sees a deleted event. So like it's unclear to me how we would finish the test if the thing in question did not actually get deleted. And thus it's unclear to me why we need to check the sequence of watch events.
It's unclear why we need to check this sequence, because at each step we're using a watch already. Is that ring true?
For each step in the test, wherever it is, you'll have access to the watch.
I'm pretty sure the watch event sequence verifier is what we call before. And there's a reason we did it on the outside. And was it, if you're talking about they're addressing that flake issue of trying to restart the test?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Remove that completely and say, well, just don't restart it. We're going to rely on that flake.
Like if the test fails, the test fails. Yeah. Like I was concerned, I'm sorry, I may be bouncing around a lot. I don't know how easy this is for other folks to follow, but like I was concerned with when we tried deleting something, and then we waited to receive an event from the watch that says, yes, it was deleted. I can't remember what it was that made us think like, oh, it's possible for the test to finish, but for the deletion not to have successfully completed. I honestly can't remember why. But like, so another thing about this watch sequence events verifier that feels like an anti-pattern to me is it looks like you're having to pass in a function that like cleans up the scenario if it doesn't work successfully, and that starts to feel an awful lot like a before each and after each for a specific Ginkgo test or something.
Oopsies. Yeah, that was found to be necessary due to the fact of the test upon restart may still having resources lying around, such as if you create a resource, which you're more than likely to do, you don't want to have that same resource with the same name existing. So that's just a way of doing it. You could just pass it an empty function in your test if you have nothing to clean up or don't want to use that aspect of it. But
I think what Aaron is pointing out here is that a lot of this is part of the framework of Ginkgo itself.
Oh, okay.
And how Ginkgo has a for each and after each that already does a lot of that cleanup, and the Kubernetes community's E2E testing framework extends that a bit further by doing some things like cleaning up namespace and whatnot.
Okay.
I guess there's just a part of me that's feeling like you should let it fail rather than retry it, because that's sort of the decision. Like I said, it seems to mimic the behavior that we stopped using in Ginkgo, where we retry a test if it fails. This feels an awful lot like just for the most part retrying a test if the test fails, and so it's cleaning up before it retries the test, and that seems off to me.
Would it be a big deal to drop the retry here in this case? and
Well,
as far from the utility itself? And would that affect much of a code change?
That might be about 5-ish lines of change, I think. 1, 2, 3.
I mean, I guess, yeah, right now, there's a part of me that wants to just default to merge and iterate, and it's suggest that you open up follow-up issues that you assign to yourselves to make sure that we work to clean this up, because that will give us signal on whether or not this way of writing tests provides flake-free tests. Ultimately, I think that's what the intent of introducing all of this complexity was. It was A, by using watches instead of polls, you would get through the test faster. And then B, by doing all of this retrying, like maybe it will be more reliable in the face of a heavily loaded cluster. And I'm guessing you don't have a way to reliably create a loaded cluster and see how things flake. So just letting the test run in CI is a really great way to reproduce that behavior or see if that behavior reproduces. This then leaves us with, if it turns out these are still flaky and unreliable, we will revert these changes. If these are not flaky and unreliable, great, we're getting signal that this seems to be some kind of a useful pattern, and we could try to iterate on simplifying this and see if we continue to have useful and reliable signal. Does that sound like a fair compromise?
I want to make sure we give an opportunity for Cindy, George, or Srini to speak up at this time, because they're here. Or II team. Yeah.
Well, I kind of partly agree with Aaron, but overall, I think if we go this route and we figure out if the tests are flaky, how do we pull back? Alternative way to. So I'm still not quite understanding.
That for us, we have very specific tests that are using this framework that we can merge at the same time, and they're not going to become conformance tests. But if they're flaky, then we'll need to roll those back. And at that's I think what Aaron is suggesting is that we go ahead and do a merge, and then as we see that they're flaky, we can roll them back. But in addition, adding some issues that we assign for where those concerns are. Is that right, Aaron?
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the call.
Apologies, I was double booked, but nice to see everybody.
Yeah, I don't know. I see John's sign off on the PR. So I will err on that side. But like I said, my meta point is I still feel like it's a lot of code. Like I said, I sympathize and empathize with y'all trying to write these tests. This can't be easy to write. It's certainly not easy for me to read. And I wish we could address that a little bit better. I think it would make everybody's lives better if we could more concisely express intent in a non-flaky, reliable way. But I don't have a great answer for that right now.
Thanks, Aaron. I will go ahead and we've got that in the notes. As I'm sharing my screen, this is the issue, and then this is that PR. So if we can go ahead and add that approve. So yeah, approve here. that will merge that. So if we go back into our discussion, thank you for all of the notes, Rian. And wow, lots of good notes there. Thank you for that. We also have some endpoints that are low priority, and I don't know that we have a concrete list of those. We do have a concrete list of endpoints that are not part of conformance that we did in an org file earlier. And there may not be a low priority list that's formal, and that's okay, but I just wanted to get clarification. Rian had brought that up on some of our prioritization efforts.
Sorry, did you say that? I was typing something. Did you say that again?
Okay. There were stuff that we turned off recently. I think there's a couple of endpoints, but I didn't know if there was a general direction and stuff that's low priority that we're not looking at currently, even though they are part of conformance, but they were too complex for now. I think proxy was one that we had initially shoved off, anything dealing with proxy, but I may pick that up again, but I'm putting it below more low-hanging fruit currently.
That sounds fine. What would help drive the discussion right now is if you had a list of what wasn't covered and we could glance at that.
Aaron, what the list I shared with you of all open endpoints that's not covered yet. What kind of the idea behind this is if we can create a list that we can share with the test writing team and say, okay, because of certain reasons, this and this and this endpoint should be low priority. It would help us a lot if we can basically mark them off as do not look at these for the moment. It's not that we're not going to look at them. We have come to the meeting with some endpoints that was rather not important for now. And if there is a list like that from the community, it would be very helpful. That was the idea of the point.
Yeah, I understand that. I guess I don't have an answer for you off the top of my head.
We'll follow up with that. I think Rian, if you want to point that list that you just mentioned to Aaron, we can put that in the document as well.
I think I've pulled up this spreadsheet, but there's a part of me that feels like I shouldn't be the sole person making calls here. I think sharing this list with SIG architecture or something, like trying to get consensus from the group instead of just me would be preferable. So just like looking at this list, I guess it's not super clear to me what you have or have not designated as low priority or how I would go about designating low priority. And when I say this list, sorry, I'm pasting that spreadsheet into chat is what I'm looking at.
For the moment, by the time I shared the list with you, it was just an overview of what is not tested. So maybe I'll make a separate document out of that, just say, okay, these things are, and I can actually, a couple of things can be removed off there already that's merged. So then we can share a specific file with the community and say, okay, what do you think about these for low priorities? And then maybe make a PR and just document that these things for these reasons are low priority. And as I shared in our discussion, that we really don't want to go to Excel lists as tools. That's merely an output of the tooling, and it reads easy for everybody to have a look at. So yeah, I'll make a list, share it with the community.
I completely understand. You're asking for priority. I'm saying I should not be the only person giving you priority.
Fully agree.
Take this and bring it up for SIG Arch on it's 2 days. We're short on time, and I just want to make sure we know these other PRs that are open, that are ready for approve, that depend on the life cycle. Sorry, on the promotion. This one is updating Confu config map resources, which we're failing some tests on. So we'll back up on that one for now. Although it would be good to get a review on. And Aaron, you have thoughts on replication control lifecycle. You're going to circle back to that, or do you want to?
My thought was to merge the watch tooling and everything that depends on it. And
Okay.
I think that's not what I should be doing. The replication controller test is currently flagged as flaky, so it will not get traffic via PRs. Some of the other tests will, and we will deal with those accordingly.
The last two that I want to make sure we get to are the requests to move these from triage to sorted backlog. The first one is plus 16 endpoints. This was brought up by Stephen, and it's a fairly, it's an easy one, I think. We've got the different API groups that are currently not hit by any endpoints. The reference is pretty straightforward. Go through the list of APIs, iterate through the list, get an endpoint. Test. Here's the Go mockup. Again, a pretty straightforward. I think it's around 14 lines. That results in all of these checks, and it does result in an increase. This is one that's fairly simple, not a lot of complexity to it, and it is there just to make sure that what we retrieve via the list of APIs that are available, and when we go through to retrieve that group name, that it is also there. I think what the specific on this, if I remember, was for the default version of an API, making sure that that version of the API, the preferred version, is available, is the actual test itself. Okay. So that we don't accidentally set preferred version to be something that's not available to our users.
So I think that certainly sounds valid. My gut reaction is this sounds like something if I were in your shoes, I would ask SIG API machinery about this test. Okay. Number one, they might have opinions on how to write it if no such test exists already. Number two, I am a little surprised that API machinery doesn't have test coverage over discovery. I would have expected them to have a test that does this already. The fact that they don't is surprising. So maybe we have overlooked it, or maybe you have gotten a really great catch. But they would be the people to know.
Sorry. Find the select statement. It may be somewhere else. This is hit by E to E. Most of them aren't hit at all by any test. Unless we've got some tooling issues, I really, they're not.
No, you're probably right. That looks like it. I don't know. There's a discovery file under API machine test ET API machinery, and it only does one test about storage version.
Okay.
So that might be a good place to.
We will do that. Follow up with SIG architecture, and this last one is one endpoint. It's also from Stephen. Thank you for this second one, Stephen. And this is pretty much just get the code version. It's an untested endpoint. The mock test is pretty straightforward to verify that the major and minor match what we're looking for, and it is currently untested, completely untested. And so that will get us at least 17 points if SIG API machinery is happy. I don't think there's a SIG to hit for get the version. We are the.
I would ask API machinery about this as well, just for this. Again, I'm kind of shocked that kubectl tests don't cover this.
I think it's part of how our Golang library is written. It actually, and the same thing for when we're trying to get other endpoints that are exposed via the API, but because of the way the tooling is written, it doesn't hit them. But they are part of the API itself. But they just assume they exist, or in the exploration process, the discovery finds them in a different way.
Okay.
I just realized we're close to time and I wanted to respect, we're 4 minutes, we're okay.
Well, yeah, they both sound good to me. If I would
okay. we'll move those from triage into backlog. So we have a nice bit of backlog, and with that replication, sorry, with the watch retry tooling there, that's 20 points that should go on the board to be soaking. We'll look for those to be non-flaky, and if they get non-flaky for 2 weeks, we'll be really good there. And we have quite a few points in the backlog. I'd say about 30 right now, top of my head. So we're on track for this. And again, another shout out to, scroll back up. Thank you for all those notes, by the way, Rian. Liggett, and he did it in his PR as well. I'm looking forward to the bot. We have some work progressing on that, but nothing that I want to share here yet.
Okay.
Thank you all for your time, and I'll see you in the community. And have a good day.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good day. Cheers.
See ya.
One more chat as I go. That's the sheets.